Welcome to Illicit Files, the podcast that dives deep into the world of true crime, exploring the most chilling, mysterious, and mind-bending cases from around the globe, where the untold crimes meet the curious mind. Each episode, we will unravel a new mystery that'll have you questioning everything. Ready to dig deep? I'm your host, Lyra. Before we start this episode, I would like to mention we have a newly released Instagram account at illicit.files where we will be updating our weekly schedule as well if we're having any special episodes, our daily schedule with the dates linked. And we will also have a link tree in our bio where before each episode we will be posting prior an hour or two a document containing a more detailed explanation of what I will be speaking on today and pictures for reference. So let's get started with the first episode. Cipher of Shadows, the Zodiac Killer case. Who was he? Known as the Zodiac Killer, he is an unidentified American serial killer. He is well known for his cryptic messages that he sent to the media. He has said himself that he has murdered over 37 people, but only 5 people have been confirmed for death from 1968 to 1969. What was the Zodiac Killer's real name? Although it was never verified who, the most cited suspect was Arthur Leigh Allen, born in 1933 and died in 1992. But there was not enough physical evidence to prove his guilt. And personally, I also believe it was not Arthur Leigh Allen. Doing the math, this case happened around 56 years ago. 56 years ago, and it is cited that the Zodiac Killer should be in his 70s and 80s now, which means the Zodiac Killer should have been in his early 20s or just right around his 20s when this case took place. Arthur Leigh Allen does not add up to our age referencing. But Arthur Leigh Allen was no less of a monster. He was a sex offender who was institutionalized in 1975 for child molestation. Okay, so talking about an earlier murder, stabbing death of an 18-year-old college student in Riverside, California in 1966 is also sometimes attributed towards the Zodiac Killer. There have been a few other possible connections towards the Zodiac Killer, which is a case that happened on June 4th, 1963. Robert and his fiancée Linda Edwards were seniors at Lompoc High School in Santa Barbara County, in Southern California. On a Tuesday in early June 1963, the couple decided to use their senior ditch day to go to a beach near the state park. But the teenagers never returned home. Robert's father went down to the beach and was horrified to discover their bodies lying together inside the remains of a crumbling shack. The victims were bound with a rope and seemed like they tried to escape. They were shot, killed with a .22 caliber weapon. Robert was shot 11 times and Linda had been shot 9 times. The killer then dragged the bodies to a shack where he tried to set a fire, but ultimately failed. The investigators had a few leads, but in the end, it was announced that it was just a possible Zodiac connection. And another possible connection happened in Riverside, October 30th, 1966. 18-year-old Sherry Josephine Bates lived with her father, Joseph, and was a student at Riverside City College. In October 30th, 1966, she left a note that said, "Dad went to the RCC library." But the next morning, her Volkswagen Beetle was found abandoned near a library parking lot, and her body was lying nearby between the two houses. She had been stabbed several times and her throat was slashed. Police found a men's Timex watch at the crime scene, a print from a military boot, some hairs dried blood on the victim's hand. Sherry Joe's purse was intact, and an autopsy revealed no evidence of sexual assault. 1 month after the murder, the local newspaper and the police department received a typewritten letter titled "The Confession" from someone who claimed to be the killer. The author wrote, "Miss Bates was stupid. She went to the slaughter like a lamb," and added, "I am not sick, I am insane." In April 1967, the newspaper and the police, Joseph Bates, received virtually identical handwritten letters which read, "Bates had to die. There will be more," and the note was signed with a symbol that resembled the letter said. In 1969, the Riverside Police had contacted the Northern California investigators regarding the similarities between the Zodiac crimes and the murder of Sherry Joe Bates. Sherwood Morrill, the document examiner for the California Department of Justice, concluded that the Zodiac was responsible for the crimes linked to the Bates case. The Riverside connection was later revealed to the public by Paul Avery, reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. Zodiac then sent a letter to the Los Angeles Times indicating that the killer confirmed the theory that he had killed Bates. The Zodiac wrote, "I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity. They are only finding the easy ones. There are a hell lot of them down there." But that case is still not a confirmed case. Confirmed in the sense linked to the Zodiac case. Now moving on to the actual confirmed Zodiac cases. The first case happened on December 20th, 1968. This was 5 nights before Christmas. High school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday had gone on their first official date together, promising Betty Lou's parents they'd be home by 11 p.m. But shortly after that, a few passing motorists saw the car and its occupants parked at Lover's Lane. And a few moments later, another driver noticed 2 seemingly lifeless bodies on the side of the road. But it was soon discovered Betty Lou was dead, with 5 bullet wounds in her back. David was found next to the car with a bullet wound in his head, still breathing, near death. The shell casings recovered at the crime scene identified the ammunition as the Winchester Western Super X copper coated, and the ballistic evidence indicated that the killer used a .22 caliber, possibly a J.C. Higgins Model 80 semi-automatic pistol. And the investigators believed that the 2 teenagers were a likely random target killed by the stranger for unknown reasons. But when we move on to our second case, you'll start to see, sure, this was a random teenager, but the Zodiac killer for this killing spree does have an MO in his mind. The upcoming 3 cases will be noticed that it were all teenage or young adult couples. The Zodiac killer targeted couples. But the twist from the next 2 cases that I will be telling you is he targeted couples, but each time the male from the couple survived. This next case is called the Vallejo case. It happened on July 4th, 1969, and is a confirmed Zodiac case. 22-year-old Darlene Farron was a wife, a mother, and a popular waitress at the Vallejo restaurant. The night of July 4th, she went to pick up a friend and stopped at a parking lot in the Blue Rock Springs Park. And then Michael later told the police that another vehicle pulled into the lot, and then in a few minutes fired the car with 9mm handguns. Michael was shot in the jaw, shoulder, and leg. Darlene was hit several times, and in a call later traced to the gas station payphone, a man had called the Vallejo Police Department and claimed responsibility for the shooting as well as the murders on Lake Herman Road. And according to the dispatcher, the caller spoke in a low voice saying, "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." This is pretty dark. Darlene died on arrival at the hospital, but Michael survived. Investigators were unable to identify any viable suspects around the area. This was the second case, so if you have been listening so far, you see how he mentioned he has now killed 2 couples, and to the Zodiac Killer, he has killed Michael, but Michael survived. And now, if you have had the time to open my Google Docs, I have linked and kept the picture of the 6 letters, or rather 4 letters up until now, that were given by the Zodiac. It had the messages and a few cryptic messages as to what he wanted to say. These messages will be read on a part 3 special for just the Zodiac letters and decoding and all that things. Now, moving on to another confirmed Zodiac case. Another couple. This happened in Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969. On a late Saturday, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were relaxing along the shore of Lake Berryessa, around 30 miles north of Napa, California. But a man appeared holding a gun and wearing a hooded costume, with a white cross circle stitched over the chest, explaining that he had escaped from prison and needed money and a car to escape to Mexico. The stranger bound their wrists with pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline. Without warning, he plunged a large knife into Brian's back 6 times, and then stabbed Cecilia 10 times as she fought for her life. Then the man walked to Brian's car and used a pen to draw a cross circle on the door with the dates and locations of the previous attacks. The date, September 27th, 69. Time, 6:30. By knife, 7:40 p.m., a man called Napa Police Department to report a double murder. The caller described Brian's car and directed the police to the scene of the crime and confessed, "I'm the one who did it." Police traced the call to pay a phone at a car wash in Napa. Cecilia died 2 days later. Brian survived. I've also linked another message down in the Google Docs with the picture of what was written on the car door. Now, moving on to the last case I will be talking about today, the San Francisco case on October 11th, 1969. Another confirmed Zodiac case. Paul Stein, a 28-year-old student and husband, worked as a cab driver in San Francisco. That night, Stein had picked up a fare headed for a destination in upscale Presidio Heights in the neighborhood. It was around the intersection of Washington and the Cherry Streets. But the passenger shot Stein in the head and removed a piece of the victim's shirt. The man walked away just before the police arrived, but the police radio broadcasted mistakenly described the suspect as a black man. In passing, officers dismissed a white man resembling the correct description. This error was the biggest fatal error made by the task force, letting go the Zodiac Killer. Fingerprints found on the driver's side of the cab may have belonged to the killer. and a sketch was produced based on the descriptions provided by witnesses. And this case was considered a routine robbery until the office of the San Francisco Chronicle received an envelope with a letter from the Zodiac, which began with the words, "I am the murderer of the taxi driver." The envelope also contained a blood-stained piece of Paul Stein's shirt. The Zodiac denied he left fingerprints and claimed that the police sketch was inaccurate because he had worn a disguise. The writer had mocked the police for failing to catch him and threatened to shoot children on a school bus. In my Google Docs, I have linked the letter of the Chronicle postmarked October 13, 1969. As mentioned before, the envelope also contained a piece of the blood-stained shirt belonging to the victim, Paul Stein. A few more letters that I have linked are the envelope to the Chronicle postmarked November 8, 1969, which contained another piece of the cab driver's shirt and a humorous greeting card, and another cipher containing 340 syllables. The writer added Des July Og Sept Oct equals 7, a possible reference to more unidentified victim or upcoming victims. Now, he also sent a 7-page letter to the Chronicle on November 9th, 1969, just a day after, which is considered to be the longest message from the Zodiac. The Zodiac then said that the police had stopped him near a crime scene but let him go. Another fatal mistake. Zodiac also included a bomb recipe and a diagram of the explosive. The next letter was addressed to a famous attorney, Melvin Belly, postmarked December 20th, 1969. The writer feared he would kill again and asked Belly to intercede, which kinda feels weird at this point. He willingly went and killed people, but wants to get caught, but at the same time he's playing games with the NYPD and attorneys to try to get caught, but doesn't want to get caught. It's like he's playing a mind game, which in where the letter said, "Please help me, I cannot remain in control for much longer." If this was a genuine letter, I'm not sure, but if this was not a genuine letter, that is one thing I would be sure of. Melvin's letter also had said, "Merry Xmas and New Year. Dear Melvin, this is the Zodiac speaking, wishing you a happy Christmas. The one thing I ask of you is, please help me. I cannot reach out for help because of this thing in me won't let me." I believe that this is just another game that the Zodiac was playing. Another game that his mind was trying to get people to fall into. And this is the end of part 1 of the Zodiac Killer episode. And now talking just a few opinions that I have from this case, part 1, because there are around 3 parts for this episode, which I will release soon or after a few different cases, because part 1 of this episode is a different thing, part 2 is a different thing, part 3 is a different thing, but also very important towards the case. And I'll just give a little gist about part 2 and part 3. Part 2 is the continuation of the Zodiac Killer cases, when he went quiet for a long period from around the 1970s to the 1990s. There was no killing for around 20 years. But suddenly, in New York again, a new killing spree took place. Signed, the Zodiac Killer. But when the police from San Francisco and the NYPD confirmed with each other it was not the same person, this was an entirely new killing case story. So I will get back to part 2 in some time, which could be possibly a bit more deep in the killer's methods and how he did them, why he did them. And it was an identified case where he was identified as who the killer was, and it is also said he is now in prison. Justice prevailed for this case. And part 3 will be just me going over the letters, all the letters by the Zodiac, and trying to decode some of the stuff and telling you guys some of the decoded stuff, because there happen to be a few things that have been decoded recently in recent times that was found from professionals. Now, I want to mention the victims, 5 victims' names, just to honor them, to say, what happened was completely unfair. And these were David Arthur Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Cecilia Ann Shepard, Paul Lee Stein, and Darlene Elizabeth Barron. Now, the last confirmed Zodiac murder was on October 11th, 1969. This is the end, as I said before, of the Zodiac Killer Part 1. And this episode I had kind of researched for over 2 days. I watched a few documentaries, a few Netflix movies, a few YouTube videos, and even a podcast on what was really happening. But I want to potentially tap into the Zodiac Killer's mind. And one thing that is very noticeable was this was all just a game to him. He had no remorse over what he had done. And it was a game. He killed for attention. He killed saying he couldn't control it. But this was not out of, he couldn't get out of it saying his hands were tied, he had to do it. This was a type of case where he did it for his own pleasure. That is the sickening part of the story, that it is real and he did it out of his pleasure. One of the ciphers that he sent has his name on it, which has yet to be uncoded. But it's the fact that he got away with it and now is 70-something, maybe with potentially more victims like he claimed, 37 murders. With more victims out there, never to be heard of again, just because we were never able to catch this Zodiac Killer. What I saw when I was making part 1 and part 2 for part 3 is that the Zodiac Killer is not necessarily just one person. The Zodiac Killer could potentially be many people. Part 1 talks about a completely different Zodiac Killer. Part 2 is talking about another Zodiac Killer. Bringing this episode to an end, you can reach us on our Instagram ID at illicit.files or reach us out on illicit.files.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in into Illicit Files. If today's case left you with questions or chills, don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries and dark truths. Stay curious, stay cautious, and until next time, keep your files open. This is Lyra, signing off.